It's actually
Today I'm just going to do my testimony, and then next time I'll probably give the sermon. But first I want to say a word of prayer before before we begin. Our gracious Father in heaven, I thank you for bringing me into this church family. And I ask, Father, that you would help me to give my testimony today, and that somebody may be reached or impressed or encouraged by my story. And Father, I ask that you would continue to bless this church family and help us to reach the world for your kingdom. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen. So the scripture reading is taken from Revelation chapter 2 through 5. The main verse that I want to emphasize is verse 4, where it talks about, "Nevertheless I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love." And so we know this is Jesus talking here, and he's speaking to the church. And so his main complaint to the church of Ephesus is talking about losing their first love. So we're going to talk a little bit today about love. I would imagine it's safe to say that almost everyone here today has at one time in their life been in love. And did you know that science has shown that the in love brain looks different than one that's experiencing lust, or unlike a brain of someone that is in a long-term committed relationship? Studies have revealed that the brain's in-love phase is a unique and well-defined period of time. They have discovered elevated levels of central dopamine, which is a chemical involved in the attention and focus of your brain when you're in the in-love phase. And some of the signs that can tell you that you're definitely in this phase are these. You can't think about anyone else or want to be with anyone else. You only think about the positive traits of the other person, and you tend to overlook their negative traits. And you almost have like a high feeling similar to that on drugs. 85% of your time is thinking or daydreaming about the other person. The feeling of empathy for the other person's troubles or pain, and willing to sacrifice for them. You reorder your interests, reschedule your plans, your life to accommodate being with the other person. And some people feel like they're almost like out of control. That's what love can do to you. So we're going to come back to talking about this, but first I'm going to go ahead and start with my testimony. So I was born in 1981 in the suburbs of South Kansas City, a middle-class family of 5. And that's my family there. Not the greatest picture, but limited planning time. So I'm going to, just a couple things that happened in 1981 I thought was interesting. Sandra Day O'Connor becomes the first woman appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Assassination attempts were made against U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II. And born in 1981 also are musicians Beyonce, Justin Timberlake, Britney Spears, Alicia Keys, and also Eli Manning was born in 1981, along with actors Elijah Wood and Natalie Portman. So I'm the same age as Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears, only not famous. All right, so let's see. So I was born in grew up in the 80s pretty much. When I was growing up, we had Nintendo was like just coming out. We didn't have the technology and the game systems that the kids have nowadays with the headsets and online and everything. So I was born of a family of 5. Pretty normal life. I was the baby of the family. I had my sister was the oldest, my brother was the middle child, and I was the baby, of course. And me and my brother you could almost say we're like Jacob and Esau, pretty opposites. I was more of the shy, introverted person, and I was the good one. And my brother, he was more of the outgoing troublemaker, shall we say. And so, pretty normal life, I'd say. We grew up living by a golf course, so we played on the golf course. We rode our bikes on the bike trails. I grew up playing soccer. I was actually a straight A student in grade school, so I got good grades, good behavior. So when this is a picture of my grandma. So when we were kids, my grandma used to come and pick us up and take us to church every Sunday. And this continued for a few years. And so my grandma was a big part of my life. And so my grandma would come pick us up, take us to church. The Church of Christ is the church that we went to. And eventually, because my grandma, she lived quite a ways away from us, so it became kind of, a lot for her to come every week and pick us up and take us to church. So eventually my parents actually, and let's see a picture of church. So my parents actually started taking us to church, and we switched to a different church. And that lasted, I want to say for maybe a year or so. And I did, when I was 8 years old, I don't know why, but I just wanted to get baptized. They thought I was kind of too young or not mature enough. But they went ahead and they baptized me at 8 years old. And I do remember one of my Sunday school teachers, I remember her husband carved out the 10 Commandments in wood. And yeah, for all the kids in class. And I'll never forget it. And we got to take an engraver and actually engrave the 10 Commandments into our little wooden tablet. I wish I still had them today. But somehow over the years they got lost. But eventually what happened is, I guess my parents weren't, really dedicated to God. And we were getting older and we wanted to stay up late on the weekends. And so when it was time to get up early to go to church, we're like, oh, we don't want to get up. And we kind of, got out of going to church, shall we say. So it would happen a lot to where we'd give our parents trouble, when they're trying to get us up and get us ready for church. So we eventually, it kind of just gradually stopped going to church. Like everybody, my parents, me, my sister, brother, we just stopped going. And the Church of Christ actually sent us a letter saying that they had removed us from the membership, which I guess my parents were a little upset, about the letter to where they were I guess, kind of kicking us out of church for not going to church. I thought it was interesting that at least we contact, our missing members and ask them, do you still want to be considered a member? But they, in a way, just told us that they took us off, took us out of the church. So I was about 9 or 10 at that time. And so eventually my parents separated. They weren't getting along. They were having trouble with my brother. My brother was starting to get into trouble, and he was causing a lot of drama. And so they would argue a lot. And so my parents, my dad ended up moving out because they just felt it was better, to not live together. And that was kind of a pivotal time in my life, I'd say, because that was right about the time that I was, going through puberty, growing up, and getting ready to go into middle school. Which middle school was a big change for me. In grade school, I was, popular. I did well in school. I was voted most likely to be like the counselor, I remember that. But when I got to middle school, everything changed. You've got kids from all these different schools. You've got the older 8th graders. You've got a bunch of kids that you don't know anymore. So I remember my friend Billy, we went to the same grade school together, and we were in a few of the same classes. So me and Billy, we kind of, became really close because, we knew each other from grade school. So Billy became my best friend in middle school. And this was about the time that I started getting into drugs. My brother, he was, getting into smoking and drinking and stuff like that. And I do remember one thing that my dad told me before he moved out. He was like, don't you follow in your brother's footsteps. You're going down the wrong path. And later he would also say, this I'll never forget, he says, nothing is real when you're on drugs. Because he knew me and my brother were getting into trouble. And so he told me that. And so that stuck with me. That made me think a lot. And it's really a true statement. I would come to find that out later in life. So I started smoking cigarettes, drinking, smoking marijuana. And eventually it would lead on to, my brother, he was older, so he was starting to get into harder drugs. So eventually I would end up doing methamphetamines, doing cocaine and LSD, opium. So pretty much I had done all those drugs by the time I was 15 years old. I guess I kind of got started, early in life. And the fact that my, parents weren't together, it was just my mom. So it was a lot easier for me and my brother to get away with, doing stuff when it was just mom there. Although she would always say she wasn't born yesterday. So, but, and I remember I wasn't stupid, I guess. I remember going the DARE classes in grade school, telling us how drugs were bad. I was a pretty good, a good kid, but I guess really peer pressure really does have an effect, because I had my brother that was doing it, and then my best friend Billy. He got into smoking pot. So I'll never forget the first time we got high. We were smoking in his shed, and we just could not stop laughing. It was like everything was funny. But I'll come to find out that doesn't last very long. So me and Billy became pretty close. I got my first job when I was about 13 or 14. I started cleaning movie theaters in the summertime to basically support my, drug habits. So that was pretty fun. Felt like I was kind of growing up, working. And then also my friend Billy, Billy's dad was actually an alcoholic. He would pretty much drink like a case of beer every day, and they had a liquor cabinet. So I'll never forget the first time we got drunk either. We got into the liquor cabinet and drank, I believe it was dry gin, and we got pretty drunk. My dad actually busted me that time. So it seemed like I just progressed, getting further and further into doing drugs. And it wasn't for us, a lot of kids in high school, middle school, high school, tend to experiment with drugs. It's peer pressure and everything. But for me, I guess my brother was really getting into the hard drugs. And for us, it was like pretty much an everyday thing, not just on a weekend or occasionally at a party. It was becoming pretty much an everyday occurrence, at least with smoking, marijuana. So then comes high school. So middle school is a big change, but I managed to get through that. And I still somewhat managed to keep up my grades. I was still getting A's and B's in school. But then comes high school. And in high school, you had the different groups. I would imagine it's been that way for a long time. You've got we had, like you call them, either the jocks, the people that played sports, or the preppies, the ones that wore the Letterman jackets, and the ones that were popular. And then you'd have, I guess, my group, which would be called like the grunge people that wore the baggy pants and the rock and roll T-shirts. And then you'd have we call them like the hip gangster wannabes, the guys that were into rap and, wanted to be like gangsters, I guess. So I was in the grunge group. And so freshman year in high school, Billy gets in trouble in school and he gets suspended. And I guess that weekend there happened to be a party. So, oh yeah. Okay, so this is just a picture of kids drinking and drugs. So there happened to be a party, and it was thrown by, I guess you'd call them like the popular kids, and like the part of the hip gangster people were at this party. And so Billy ended up, after he got suspended from school, he never went home. I guess he hung out with some friends, and then he ended up going to this party. And unfortunately what happened was he got really drunk at the party. And there were some rumors actually that he got in a fight at the party with one of the guys that, one of the guys there. So Billy was found dead, lying in a ditch the next day after the party. So they're still not sure what the cause of death was. It was either possibly from alcohol poisoning or from hypothermia, because it happened to be in December. So from him lying in the ditch all night, he either got hypothermia or alcohol poisoning, one or the other. I guess they were never sure what the exact cause was. But there was a rumor had it that he got in a fight with this kid, and this kid, his name was Chance Miller, and he just happened to be one of the detectives on the police force. He happened to be his son. So there was kind of rumor that he got in a fight and beat Billy up and left him in the ditch to die. And it's possible that the police department covered it up. Because I remember when they were questioning me where Billy could have gotten the alcohol, I was like, his parents had gotten rid of the liquor cabinet. There was nobody that could have bought it for him. So the only place he got it was at this party. So that was a pivotal point in my life, I'd say. When Billy's mom called me and said Billy's dead, I couldn't believe it. I was like, what do you mean, he's gone? It's just like, pretty much I would imagine whenever you hear about a loved one dying, for a while it takes time to sink in, shall we say. So I remember after Billy died, I actually remember yelling at God. It had been years since I ever really even, went to church, but I still remembered God, and I remember yelling at Him, but I didn't, at that time, I guess, really turn to God. I was angry at God, angry at life. So it was kind of a dark time for me. I guess I kind of went into depression, got further into doing drugs. However, the one positive thing about it was I stopped drinking, because I said that's what took my friend's life, was alcohol. So at least I did give up drinking at that point. Music was a big passion of mine. When I was in high school, we still had CDs. Nowadays, I guess they just download everything. But I was really big into music. I guess rock and roll was probably my main music. And so, when I turned 16, my sophomore year, these parties called raves started becoming really popular. And I got hooked into going to these raves, which in a way I guess it kind of took me out of depression, because one thing that a rave is like a dance party, basically. A lot of them were underground, illegal parties where they'd rent like a factory or warehouse, and then they'd have DJs come in and have the lights and everything. So for me, these rave parties, it just kind of felt like that was like the place for us druggies, to go party. They pretty much had everything. They had the loud music, the lighting, the visual effects. We'd have massage parties and stuff like that. So I really got hooked on to going to these raves, and of course taking ecstasy, because that was like a big, popular thing to do at the raves, and so that was, I guess, that kind of somewhat brought me out of my depression. I was kind of getting happy about life, but of course it wasn't true happiness. I do have a few facts about drugs and teenagers' drug use. And this study was as of 2015. 68% of seniors have tried alcohol. 10% have driven after drinking. I wish more teenagers and young adults were here today to hear this. Teen alcohol abuse is responsible for over 200,000 ER visits and over 4,000 deaths among kids under 21 every year. By 2015, I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but since 2015, more high school seniors smoke pot than cigarettes. And they are just as likely to smoke marijuana as they are to drink alcohol now. So pretty much the two main popular drugs among teenagers is going to be marijuana and alcohol. Okay, well, one thing, I never did get into drug dealing. That was one thing I kind of saw right off the bat that that's not for me. If it wasn't with people trying to rob you, or your friends ratting you out, or the police trying to bust you, there's just a lot of drama into, trying to sell drugs. So I knew right off the bat I wasn't doing that. So that's a good thing. Or that was one good thing. Okay. So I'm going to fast forward to my senior year. Okay, so my senior year, I was still big on going to these rave parties. So this was, I believe, December. And so I had a whole group of friends that we wanted to go to this party in Olathe. And so I asked my mom, because she had a Jeep Cherokee, so she had more room in her vehicle. So I told my mom I was going out on a date. I think I told her I was going to Christmas in the Park or something like that. And so my mom let me borrow her Jeep Cherokee. And then I had room, to fit more people. So we go to this party. Oh, that's also one of the things I wanted to talk about, raves. I've seen a lot of bad stuff happen at raves. Or I actually would see kids going into seizures from taking too much ecstasy. Either their body would get too hot, or they just OD'd or had a bad reaction. So I actually would see some kids going into seizures and having to be taken off from an ambulance. I've seen kids take off all of their clothes and run across, just run around the party because they were so high on ecstasy. And that was actually the first time that I saw homosexual activity, was at raves. I had never really seen that before. And, it didn't really even bother me at that point, as long as, they weren't hitting on me. I just was having my good time and doing my thing. But yeah, that was just some of the things that I experienced at these parties. So we went to this, it was a little club in Olathe, I believe. And I had 10 of my friends with me. And so that night I did, I believe, LSD and ecstasy. And so when it came to, so when the party was over, we had 3 carloads of people. We had these group of people we met from Nebraska, and then I had my carload of people, and then my friend Steve had met this girl at the party, and so she was driving her car, and he was riding with her. So we all were headed to a hotel to keep partying after the party. And, well, by the picture, you can imagine what happens next. So we had a train of cars driving back to a hotel. Let's see. The people from Nebraska were on the very end. I believe I was in first place, and then the girl that Steve was with was behind me. Well, I guess the girl that Steve was with, she had taken 3 ecstasy pills that night. So Steve told me, I guess when she was driving, He said it looked like her eyes had rolled back into her head or something like that. So she runs into the back of my Jeep, and we roll on the highway. And luckily, I was the only one that got hurt that day. Everybody else was no injuries, and everybody was okay. But I almost forgot that part. So before we left the rave, I had my friend Brandon. He actually put my seatbelt on me. And Brandon, if you guys would have known Brandon, he was one of the most unresponsible kids in our group. But he just happened to be the one that put that seatbelt on me about 7 minutes before we crashed. So we rolled the Jeep on the highway, and all I remember is it seemed like a tornado came and picked up the Jeep because I lost control, and at that point, all I remember was putting my hands over my head, And it was kind of interesting. This was kind of one of the first things that made me think about God, actually, or somewhat. Because my friend Billy, when we were in middle school, he gave me this little homemade tattoo to where you dip like a needle in ink and you just poke dots on your skin. So he had made this tattoo on my forearm here. And it just happened to be right where that little tattoo was there. That's where I got the gash that went across my arm. So now the tattoo's gone, because I guess somehow after the surgery and the scar, it just disappeared. But that kind of made me think, was Billy up there, watching over me? And that kind of made me, just think about God. Of course, at that time, I wouldn't turn to start following God, but I did kind of think, did Billy maybe save me? Or, I kind of had thinking going on, in my heart and mind. So that was my senior year in high school. That pretty much ruined my senior year, because not only since I wrecked my mom's car, guess whose car she got to drive? Yeah, so I had no car to drive my senior year. And not only that, so the girl who hit me, of course, she got a DUI because the cops, questioned everybody, and they all found out that we were all coming from this party. And they even tried to get me for a DUI. So they took my blood and everything and, charged me with a DUI. So my whole senior year, I'm, saving money to pay for a lawyer and have no car. So that was kind of a bummer. But luckily, I did manage to graduate high school. And so after high school, I was pretty much working at 2 restaurants. If I can find the restaurant. There we go. Okay, so I got this job working at this mom and pop restaurant when I was, I think, 15. And I pretty much worked there throughout high school. So after high school, I was working at this mom and pop restaurant full time, and I also worked at Red Lobster too. But I was trying to find a good job. So I went and applied at this cave job in Lee Summit, which was like a government files or something like that. And I had to fill out like this much paperwork and go through all the process of getting hired. And I had gotten everything done, went to the employment center like 4 or 5 times, and I was ready to go take a tour of the cave. And after that, I was basically going to get hired. Well, I just happened to be late So I was late to take the tour, and they had already left. So pretty much I didn't get that job. And the reason I bring that up was because I was making an attempt, I guess, to try to, find a good job, stop smoking. But pretty much once I didn't have that job, I kind of just said, forget it, and went back to, smoking and pretty much working two full-time jobs. And so this is going to bring me to, let's see, I guess it was about 2 years after high school. There was this girl that her name was Teresa, and she started working at Shirley's, the little mom and pop restaurant that I worked at. Now Teresa, she was a little cutie, so I started, having feelings for her. The only problem was she had a boyfriend that just happened to be in prison. And her boyfriend's name was Brandon. And the reason why he was in prison was because my friend Steve, the one that the girl was driving with from the rave, he had ripped Brandon off, I think, $800, was supposed to sell him drugs or something. He ripped Brandon off. So what did Brandon do? Brandon and another friend, they took Steve, they beat him up, and they left him in a field to die. And they even cut, the back of his ankles. I guess they were trying to cut that vein or nerve there. Fortunately for Steve, there was a girl that was with him when they beat up Steve, and she had, second thoughts, or she felt bad for Steve. So she actually called the cops, and they went to the field and found Steve. So Steve did end up, surviving. So Brandon and the other guy, they went to prison for doing that. And so Brandon was Teresa's boyfriend. And I wanted to steal Teresa away from Brandon because, he was a bad guy, right? And plus after what he did to my friend Steve, even though, Steve was kind of in the wrong, he did rip the guy off, but still. So Teresa she was living with Brandon's cousin, her friend Rachel. They were like best friends. And Rachel, my friend Jesse was Rachel's boyfriend. So they were living in their grandparents' house that just happened to be right up the street from Shirley's. So after she started working there, we started talking. And then I started kind of going over and hanging out with Rachel and Jesse and me and Teresa. We, started hanging out. And I started getting, attached. The only problem was Rachel was Brandon's cousin. She was living with Rachel, and Brandon was in prison. And I'm trying to think of how am I going to steal her away from Brandon? Because every time we hung out, it's like we were all hanging out together. And so anyway, the 4th of July comes, and to bring in, so I'm starting to get close with, Teresa, and starting to hang out a lot, and it just happens to, we have these guys named Kevin and Pee Wee. They come into the picture. Well, they're basically drug dealers that had moved in, and they were selling marijuana and cocaine. So Rachel and Teresa started hanging out with Kevin and Pee Wee because they like to do cocaine, which I guess I never really got big into cocaine myself. It was mainly marijuana for me. So the 4th of July comes, and I have a plan. I have some LSD, and I asked Rachel and Jesse and Teresa, hey, do you guys want to drop some acid and party on the 4th. So they say, yeah. So let's get back to before that, though. Again. So I forgot to mention, darn it, about a week ago before this, I was partying with my friend Adam, and we had taken some LSD, and we were partying, and I decided that I'm going to go get some whippets at this head shop, at this 24-hour head shop. And this is probably 1 in the morning, something like that. So I decide that I want to get some whippets. Well, before that, Adam had given me some pills. And I'd never really taken any pill besides ecstasy. I don't even know what kind of pills they were. Obviously, downers, though. So Adam's like, you want some pills? I'm like, okay, sure. So I pop some pill. So I drive to get the whippet. What whippets are, if you guys don't know, this was... Yeah, we did a lot of bad stuff when I was a kid. And so whippets, they have these things called whipping cream chargers, kind of like if you've seen CO2 for pellet guns. They have these whipping cream chargers. And what they have is not CO2, it's N2O, or it's nitrous oxide, basically. Yeah. So you have this thing, we call it a cracker, where you can take that cartridge and you put a balloon around it and you crack it open, and the nitrous oxide goes into the balloon. And then what you do is you take that balloon and you huff it. And people have actually died from asphyxiation from doing this. But me, of course, I thought it was really cool to do when you're already on LSD myself. So I decided I was going to go get some of those. Well, I made it to the head shop, and I bought the whippets and bought like a water pipe there, too, while I was there. And so I remember leaving the store, but if you can guess what happens, of course, by the picture. I remember leaving the store, but that's all I remember. And when I came to, it was weird because it was daylight. So I know it was dark when I was leaving the store. So the thing about taking pills, which I'm really down on taking pharmaceutical pills, and there's 2 drugs that you lose your control. Well, 2 main ones, that you can lose your control and not have any clue of what you're doing. And one is alcohol, and the second one is pills. You can actually, not remember doing things. So I'm not quite sure what I did in that time lapse there, but I remember when I woke up, I heard it was like a roller coaster. And I wake up and it feels like somebody had punched me in my face, and it felt like my hand, like I had gotten in a fight, like I had punched somebody. Well, what happened was I blacked out at the wheel. And so I blacked out at the wheel, and thank God, I ended up sliding down a guardrail. And so what happened was the airbag went off, and it popped me in my face, and I guess I still had my hand on the steering wheel, so the airbag hit my hand too. It almost felt like my hand was broken. So this was a week before, or maybe a couple weeks before the 4th of July, that I was going to go party, with Rachel and Teresa and Jesse. So what that did was that I had no wheels again. So back to the story. Another interesting thing that kind of happened was the day before I wrecked my car, my friend Travis, he had this dirt bike. It was a stolen dirt bike. And so he wanted money, so I bought it from him for $20. And I knew it was stolen, and, I didn't even need the bike, right? But I was just helping a friend out. So, it was just kind of interesting how that worked out, though, because I would end up riding that bicycle for the next year and a half for my transportation because I had, wrecked my car and I didn't have enough money to buy a new one. But so back to Teresa. And we talk about that, being in that in-love, that first love state. And that's kind of where I was. I was starting to get attached to her. And so since I had wrecked my car, Rachel picked me up. She picked up, me and Jesse and Teresa. And she drives us over to Pee Wee and Kevin's house. And I'm like, okay, what are we doing here? It's like I said, I wanted to go to Worlds of Fun. That was my plan. I wanted to do LSD and go to Worlds of Fun together. But I guess they had different plans. They didn't want to go to Worlds of Fun. They wanted to go over to Kevin and Pee Wee's and do cocaine, I guess. So we go over there, we're hanging out for a little while, and then Rachel and Teresa leave with Kevin and Pee Wee, and they leave me and Jesse at Kevin and Pee Wee's house. And I'm like, Jesse, what just happened? Why are we left here and they're going out selling drugs with Kevin and Pee Wee? And he kind of blew it off. He's like, oh, and I was like, does Rachel like Kevin? Does Teresa like Kevin? Because I thought, she liked Kevin, basically. And I guess I was right, pretty much. So, unfortunately, though, what happened was Rachel ended up getting with Kevin, and Teresa got with Pee Wee. So me and Jesse both, lost our love, which was ironic because Rachel was Jesse's girlfriend, and Rachel was Brandon's cousin, the one that beat up Steve. And actually, it was Jesse that told Rachel, and she told Brandon where Steve was for them to come and kidnap him. So, and Steve had blamed it on my friend Brandon, my other friend Brandon, that put my seatbelt on. He said he was the one that ratted out Steve, and that's when they kidnapped him. So ironically, Jesse lost, and he did it for Rachel, because that was his love or whatever. So ironically, Jesse ended up, losing Rachel, and Teresa ended up getting with Pee Wee. So that leads me to, so what did I do? So this was, I guess I'd say this was my breaking point in life. This is what took me down to the bottom. So I got mad, right? And so I said, Jesse, I'm leaving. I'm gone. I'm not going to sit here and wait for them while they're out, doing whatever. And of course, all my other friends had already left and were out partying, doing other things. So here I am by myself on LSD, right? Because we had dropped the acid. And then they dropped us off, right? So what do I do on the 4th of July? I actually go rollerblading on the bike trails. And by myself, in the dark, by myself. And I didn't really hear God at that moment, or really, but I almost kind of felt like a presence, or somebody, because I was actually crying. Here I am on LSD, rollerblading on the bike trails in the middle of the night, crying. And I guess that was kind of like the first, the time that I kind of felt God's presence or something there. Because anybody that's on LSD, usually you don't cry. Usually you can't do anything but laugh. But that was kind of where I kind of hit bottom. I had wrecked my car. I was, broke, no money, and then I lost Teresa. So that was kind of like my breaking point. That's, you'd think after I lost my best friend, right? But that was my breaking point. That's when I guess was open to start, or finally that's where God humbled me. Humbled me to the point to where I was fed up with drugs. I hated what drugs have done, and just fed up with life in general, I guess. So it wouldn't be too much longer after that to where I got this prayer by letters in my mailbox. And one of the things, I guess the first verse that God taught me was this verse right here. It was written on one of the prayer letters. And it was, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." And amen. And so that kind of made me think. Because, I was thinking a lot about life, and of course I wanted to be in love, right? So that verse just really hit my heart. Seek first God's kingdom and His righteousness, and He'll take care of everything else. And that's kind of what I started doing. I started praying. I started reading my Bible. Not to mention, since I had no car, pretty much anytime I went somewhere, I rode my bicycle to work every day. So anytime I went somewhere, I was either riding a bicycle, or I started walking my dog a lot and spending time, out in nature, which I thought is kind of interesting how it talks about how Jesus, a lot of the times, He would be, out in nature. Because I get, it seems like when you're out in nature, you're closer to God. You're away from all the distractions of the world. And that's exactly where I was in that point of my life. I was 20 years old. I had no car. I had, I didn't have a good job. But I didn't really care about the things of the world at that point in my life. For the first time in my life, I was happy. And it's hard to explain, I guess, because I just started, for me, having a relationship with God, it was like there's somebody that's there that knows everything about me. He cares about me. He knows everything that I'm going through, and He's actually listening to me. And the big thing, too, is He's leading my life now. I actually had a magic 8-ball. If any of you guys know what the magic 8-ball is, you'll take it and you ask like a question or something, and you spin it, and then you pick it up, and it has like very general answers or things. I actually used to have one of those, and sometimes I would actually, think about something and flip it, and then see what the answer was. I think about David having the ephod and asking God, right? Wouldn't that be awesome? Anytime you had a major decision or a question, you could ask God, and He could, tell you exactly what to do. So that was the big thing for me. I was so happy because I had like a new friend, and that I could talk to, that would help me with my life, because it's a hard world out there, and it's nice to know that there is a God, our Father in heaven, that's watching over us, and that He's helping us with our lives, whether we know it or not. Because I'm going to say that it was probably my grandma's prayers that kept me alive, that kept me and my brother alive. I don't have time to tell you some of the things that my brother and his stories, but me and my brother both could easily be dead today if God didn't intervene, I believe. I blacked out at the wheel, but luckily I hit a guardrail and didn't go off the highway or hit another car or kill someone else. So I believe even at that point, my whole life, probably because of my grandma's prayers, that God has watched over me and my brother and kept me safe. And so at that time in my life, I guess the void, they talk about there's a void when you don't have God in your life. So at that point in my life, I guess the void was filled. And I just remember being so happy, just doing normal things, just like running and walking with my dog and hiking through the trails and even riding my bicycle. I didn't care. I was happy. And I was in a lot better shape back then too. When you have to ride your bike to work every day and anywhere you're going, you're riding a bicycle, it's going to make you in pretty good shape. So that's going to bring me, and then eventually I quit smoking. I just kind of slowly weaned myself down, just smoked less and less and less. And I quit smoking marijuana and cigarettes. And that made me even more happy because I had overcome my addictions. So now I'm free. I have a new friend. I'm getting healthier. And so now comes to the point of how I got here. So, if I can, okay, yeah. Nope, okay. So, one day, and God, what do they say about God? He's never late, he's never late, he's almost never early, but He's always right on time, right? So God just knows how to time things just perfect in our lives. So this is at the point where I'm seeking God. I'm reading my Bible now. I'm praying every day. I read through the whole New Testament. I think I read the whole book of Proverbs. So I'm seeking God. And so one day I come home and there's this flyer in my, I believe in the door, stuck in the door. And so this church was having some prophecy seminars on Tuesdays and Thursday nights, which happened to be 2 nights that I had to work, right? And it was good. It had the Antichrist on the cover. And I'm like, man, that looks interesting. I'd like to go to these. But I'm like, but I work Tuesdays and Thursdays, so it's not going to happen. Well, interesting enough, this mom and pop restaurant that I worked at for years, we had an exterminator that would come in and spray for, bugs and mice and stuff. And his name was Delbert. And I always remember, too, Shirley would make us turn our radio down when Delbert and his dad would come in because they didn't want to hear our, loud rock and roll music. But I always remember Delbert was always so, happy and He'd be like, howdy ho, Heidi ho, neighbor. And Delbert happened to have one of those same flyers. And he's like, hey, have you seen one of these or something like that? And I was like, yeah, I got one of those in my door, but, I can't make it because I got to work. So Delbert, he ended up getting me these tapes from Rob Long. Cassette tapes. Back then, we still had cassette tapes. So I got these tapes, and I put them in the player, and I started, listening to the tapes. And I must say, when I first heard the message, or when I first heard about the Sabbath, I was like, no way. And, because I had been raised up going to church on Sunday by my grandma. And I was like, this can't be true, But amazingly, when I actually got the Bible out and I studied everything that I heard off those tapes, and come to find out that it is true. And let's see. So, and an interesting thing too was, because I always wondered about, when I was a little kid, I always wondered, why did God not just destroy the devil? Did anybody else think about that? Why did God keep the devil around, right? Well, amazingly, that was one of the questions that God answered by the Adventists, because Ellen White talks about the whole world, the whole universe watching planet Earth. And, why God didn't destroy the devil, because he wanted everything to play out for everybody to see. So I thought that was very interesting. And then also, how I mentioned when I got that gash in my arm, and I thought that was like a sign from Billy. I thought like Billy was still able to watch over me, So that was another thing that I learned, that the dead knoweth nothing, the dead are sleeping. And I thought that was fascinating. It still kind of makes me wonder, about Billy, but I know, he's in God's hands. So after I listened to the tapes and studied it out and came to the conclusion that it was truth, I was like, I don't even know of a church I didn't even know anybody went to church on Saturday. So, I believe I ended up, Delbert must have told me about these prophecy seminars that Mark was given in the Belton Community Center. So I started going to those. And I remember, this is something I'll never forget. So I remember Malcolm invited me to church, to the 89th and Holmes, the old Central down there. And he had some video that he wanted me to come watch. So I remember going to church, and there was a group of guys, and we watched this video. And I remember on my way, I had finally saved up money and got wheels again. I remember driving home that night, and I heard a voice, not from the sky or anything, but in my head, I heard this voice, and it said, "You should go to church." And so I perceived that was God or the Holy Spirit telling me that I should go to church. And so that's when, I found out where the church, I decided to start coming to church every week. And I truly believe that was God, speaking to me. So that pretty much brings me back to church again. And then naturally, Pastor Bob, baptized me into the church. Okay. And just a few things. I was never able to convince my grandma of the Sabbath. Once I heard this message, it was like I was already, experienced my first love with having a relationship with God. And then once I heard about all this truth, it's like I wanted to tell everybody. So I was telling my family. I tried to tell my grandma, but it just did not go over well with her, So I just could never convince my grandma of the truth. And then I got a lot of, my family was kind of against me. They're like, oh, you're joining this weird church. And I'll never forget, because my friends didn't leave me. They say when you become a Christian, that all your old friends will leave you. Well, they didn't leave me at first. I guess I should say at first, I still kept my friend. But I got so much, crap, for lack of a better word, from my friends about, oh, you're letting this control your whole life, and oh, you're giving this up and giving this up now. So I'll never I always remember how much trouble my friends would give me. But, that is something interesting. He really hit it on the head when he said, letting this control your whole life. Because really, God wants our whole life. He wants our love. He wants us to be in love with Him. And so that's kind of what my sermon is going to be about, my first love with God, and unfortunately, first and lost love, which is going to bring us to the 5 love languages. Okay, so has anybody read this book or heard about this book? Okay, good. A friend of mine said I should read this book before I get married. And, that's another thing I forgot to mention. So, naturally, what do you think one of the things that was praying for, right? You got it. After being heartbroken, right? So I was praying for God to find me the right woman. And interesting, right after I got baptized into the church, do you know what Pastor Bob told me? He said, do you know there's a promise in the Bible for God to find you a wife? Yeah, Genesis chapter 26, where Abraham's servant is trying to find a wife for Isaac, and prays to God. So he said that was actually a promise in the Bible for God to find me a wife. So naturally, I claimed that promise, and still waiting, but but I will tell you this, ladies, and this was my neighbor. This was not me that said it. But I was talking to my neighbor one day, and he goes, "Hey, Shaun, are you married yet?" I go, "No, not yet." He goes, "Smart man." He says, "Wait as long as you can and save up as much money as you can, because women will cost you money." Not my words. This is my neighbor. But it really made me think, because it wasn't me why I'm not married yet. It's kind of God's wisdom, I guess. So I was thinking, well, maybe God really does know, what He's doing. So have I gone over? See, the whole thing was I was trying to give my testimony and a sermon, and we decided that I did not have time to do both. So this is going to be the first part, and this is my testimony, and we're going to talk about the part of the first love and the lost love. Because this book, The Five Love Languages, talks about, remember, the in-love phase that most couples go through when they go through that in-love phase, to where, like, one of the things was you tend to overlook your mate's negative traits. And he talks about once that in-love phase wears off, then you start to realize your mate's negative traits. And that's when problems start to happen, because, you don't have the high of that phase anymore. And so he talks about there's 5 basic love languages of how you communicate love to your spouse. And we're actually going to talk about applying them to God. But not today, because it is time to close. So should I tell the dog story? Tell the dogs? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, and so my next sermon, we're going to get into the 5 love languages, and we're going to talk about, because I hate to admit it, losing our first and lost love, how you can fall out of love with someone else, or in this context with God, because we are the bride of Christ. So I'm going to tell the dog story real quick, if I can. Okay, so everybody here may know that a couple years ago I got attacked by a pit bull. And unfortunately for me, I didn't have that protective, thing that he has on his arm. But I will admit that at that day and that time, I was kind of angry with God. And I had actually was kind of murmuring and complaining that very morning that it happened. But my brother had gotten this dog from one of his bad friends, shall we say, and we had the dog about a month. And we knew that it was hard to handle. He had some aggression, but not really towards people. We know that he had it mainly towards other dogs, and he wasn't fixed as well. So he had a lot of, passion, and so his name was Torrid. That's not him, but so his name was Torrid, and so I was taking Torrid out for a walk one night, and Torrid happened to see, and this was late at night. I think it was 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night. So Torrid seen this other dog, and he wanted to get it, of course. But I said, no, Torrid, and I pull, he kept trying to pull and get it, and so I'm dragging him down the street, away from the dog. You can't even see the other dog anymore. He's gone. But I just kept dragging him, pulling him, trying to get him to come. Well, eventually what he does is he grabs the leash with his mouth, and he starts trying to tug the leash out of my hand. So now I'm playing tug-of-war with Torrid, and, well, he wasn't winning, but it was pretty even, I'd say. So eventually he decides that he's going to chew through the leash. Yeah. So that's what he does. He chews through the leash. And at that moment, when he chewed through the leash, I bent down and I grabbed his collar because I didn't want him, to get away. And that was a big, big mistake on my part. You know how they say for dogs you don't want to lower yourself to an animal? They say that's not a smart thing to do. So I bent down and I grabbed his collar, and the next thing I know, he jumps up and he bites me in my neck. Yeah, and at that point, I let go of his collar and I kind of jumped back, and I was stunned. I was almost in shock because I couldn't believe. another time he had gotten out, and I actually ran and tackled him and took him back to the house. But not this time. So he jumps up, bites me in my neck. It felt like somebody had just pinched me in my neck, like really hard. And I pulled back. And the next thing I know, he lunges at me and he takes a chunk out of my knee, or he rips my knee right open, like I guess with his razor sharp teeth. Now this is kind of funny because at that point, a car drives by and this girl stops and says, "What are you doing to your dog?" Like in a little snotty voice like that too. And I'm like, "He's attacking me." And I say, "Can I get in your car?" And I start running towards her car. And it was kind of weird because at that moment, it seemed like Torrid had kind of like, she got his attention, so he kind of looked at her. So I start running towards her car, and she drives off. And I mean, I can't blame her because she might have thought I was a crazy guy trying to, get in her car, and, you don't know these days. So she drives off. And the next thing I know, Torrid bites me right on my butt. And I'm like, "Oh." So let's see. Then he bites me on both of my legs. And then he jumps up and bites. He would have bit me on my back, but he got my sweater. Thank God. So he gets my sweater, and so I pull off my sweater real quick, and then he's kind of just chewing on my sweater, like tug of war again. And I'm pretty close to this, like a fence line. So I'm thinking that while he's chewing on the sweater, maybe I can, and I'm already injured too, because my knees ripped open, my both legs, my butt, everything, except my upper half of the body. So he's tugging on my sweater, and I'm getting ready. I'm going to try to jump over this fence and, to get free of him. But unfortunately, he rips the sweater out of my hand, or, rips the sweater apart. And then the next thing, he's at my leg again. So I say, I scream, "Father, please." And it seems like anytime I say, "Father, please," God answers. You know how when we teach our children, what do you say? Say, "Please and thank you." I think God likes to hear "please" and "thank you" as well. So I say, "Father, please help me." And right after that, there's a truck coming down the road. And it happens to be my best friend, Adam, who at this point, I hardly ever see Adam anymore. We were close. We were like really close back in the day, but now I hardly ever see Adam. He just happened to be driving down my street. And I wave my arms. I'm like, "Help, help." So he stops the truck and gets out and says, "Who are you?" Because he knew it was my brother's dog, And I said, "Adam, it's me. Help, please." So it was weird because Adam was actually afraid of my brother's dog because he had seen him, and he was a beast. So Adam comes up behind Torrid and pushes his head down, and Torrid let go of my leg. And then we both take off running and jump in his truck. And right after that, Torrid starts running up to the truck. So it was almost like time stopped at that moment, like it was, in slow motion or something. Because I just watched Adam just push his head down, which I guess is a sign of dominance. And so Torrid let go of me. But once we started, and gave us both time to run and jump in the truck, right? So, I know God's hand was in it. And I even know even more after what Adam would tell me. Do you know why Adam just happened to be driving down my street that night? It wasn't coming to see me. It was actually because, and his house was like a couple exits down, like a couple miles away. It was because he had been seeing this thing that he thinks is a UFO. He'd been seeing this thing a lot, and he even showed me the video that he had of it. And so he just happened to see that the little UFO right over, the water tower, which is, somewhat in the same direction as my house. So instead of going down the highway and taking his exit, he decides to take 140 and my exit. So that's why he was driving down that road, and that's how God used him to save me. And even more interesting part of the story, when I was in the hospital, I was watching TV, and they had a thing on the 10 most phenomenal things in nature. The number one thing was called ball lightning. And it's where you'll see like lightning in a form of a little ball. And it just kind of flies, throughout the sky. And I kid you not, that ball lightning was exactly what Adam had on his phone that he was videotaping, was ball lightning. Now, I still have not convinced Adam that that's not a UFO, that it's ball lightning. But I know that that's what it was, and that's how God delivered me. And so we thought it would be a good verse to put up that, and it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Whoever will humble themselves and start seeking God, God is going to work in your life, and He's going to lead your life, hopefully back to church, and hopefully one day home to heaven. And so I'm going to close there. I know I did go over. I hope I haven't bored you too much or anything. But I just want to thank everyone for giving me the time to give my testimony. And I just want to say, may God bless this church. Amen.